Welcome to The Gap, where it's our mission to bridge the gap between training and on-field performance.
I'm Brett Hart, owner of Hitman Performance.
And I'm Dan Labadia, the owner of Jack Javelin.
Hope you guys enjoy the show.
All right, in today's episode of The Gap, we're going to be talking about general physical preparation versus skill and how having a wide base is important, but it doesn't really mean anything unless you can progress to the sport-specific skill. And, that's the whole theme of this podcast is teaching you guys how to train and how it translates to the actual sport, because there's a lot of information out there and it's our job to be able to kind of weed through some of the noise and some of the things you guys might see on the internet, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, podcast, whatever, and to be able to teach you guys what's so important about training and how it actually impacts your sport. So Brett, talk about why we chose this topic today.
Well, we chose this topic today because we got 3-0'd by juniors in high school down at the courts in basketball. And I made the post saying, yeah, you can kind of pretty much see the flaws in being really in the weeds of strength and conditioning if you never practice the sport, based on us getting cooked by 17-year-olds and just not having the sport-specific conditioning, the skill, obviously, couldn't get the ball in the hoop, but we were stronger, like more athletic. I'm sure if we did every sports performance test you could think of, like ran a 40-yard dash, did the vert, did the broad, did the 225 bench test, like none of those kids could bench 225 just looking at them. We would have all the metrics down. Like, so that's why if you were looking on paper in the sports analytics side of things, if you were just going off sports performance metrics, we would be clear favorites to win that game by a lot. Like wouldn't even stand a chance. They wouldn't even stand a chance just based off metrics alone. And so my whole thing was saying, like, you need to get outside the weight room. You need to get outside the Google spreadsheets or the Excel. You need to get out
or the app
Get out of the Jack Javelin app or the Train Heroic app coming soon. But like, you got to see where you lack athletically. Like for us, it clearly wasn't the strength and conditioning side of things. It wasn't the GPP base. Like, we have a great base. We have a great strength skill set. We have a great power skill set. It was 100% a skill issue. And that's what we want to talk about today, is that you need to figure out, yes, strength and conditioning is important. Yes, you need to build the base. We always talk about building the base. But if you only focus on building the base, you're going to have a really wide base to your pyramid that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't transfer to anything. So you got to find out a way to get what you're doing in the weight room to go up that pyramid, which we'll talk about, to finally translate to your sport so you can play and have better results, because that's the whole name of the game. If you're going into the weight room to play for your sport and get better at your sport, that's really all you're looking for.
Yeah, and I would also argue too that I think that my biggest limiting factor was the VO2 max for sure. I mean, I think because
the conditioning, baby, yeah.
Well, because I mean, we talk about that a lot. Is that's the biggest thing that I shy away from is in my style of training is everything is usually maximum power output. I do a lot of hypertrophy. I do a lot of mobility. I do a lot of jumping. I do a lot of that stuff, right? Even Olympic lifting, and having that, obviously them being 6'3" and whatnot, I felt like in that game or those games that I was able to really turn it on in the first half. And then as the game got on, I felt my performance drop because I didn't have the endurance to keep it up the entire time. And that's being, at the end of the work week, end of the day, whatever, that being aside, I felt like when I had the ball in my hands early in the game, if I wanted to just back up and just shoot a layup every time, I feel like I could have, but it was like one of those things where, when you're playing, you're trying to have fun too. And I feel like that's not always fun. It's like, I want to,
you want to go tween, you want to throw it off the backboard. You want to shoot the threes.
Yeah. So I'm trying different things. And that's where I would argue in my specific, cause we were playing 3-on-3. We had our buddy Zach there as well. So we're playing 3-on-3, and that's where I noticed for myself, like there were times where I was at the top of the key dribbling. There was times I was driving to the lane. There's times I'm trying to dish it out and get you guys involved. I did make, I think, like 2 threes during our time there. Two out of probably like 7. But but that was what I'm saying is like, if I wanted to be at the top of the key, dish it to you, get it in the post, and just back the kid all the way up to the backboard, I probably could have. But I think that it's like for me to actually play like an actual basketball player who has to run up and down the court, play really good defense, and then be versatile in the game. That's where I felt after we got to like 5 points, I felt winded because we're playing to 11, so that would have been about halfway point. And
And the
so,
fact that we were missing a lot made the games go a lot longer.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. But I mean, that's where for me, like I feel like I was telling you this. I felt like I was the best basketball player I've ever been, but I felt like in terms of dribbling, even shooting, like sort of, I've never been a great shooter, but you get by. And then getting to the point where, any missed shot, I was able to get the rebound and try to put it back up and stuff. Obviously, I think that when you're playing 1v1, it's different than when you're playing, 3-on-3, and then it's different than when you're playing 5-on-5 full court. But I definitely felt that lack of conditioning catch up to me.
Yeah, the conditioning piece is huge. And I know Zach, me and him would talk about it a lot, being like, we wish we would do the base zone 2 cardio a lot more when we were playing sports because it does help the skill work because you're just not as fatigued as you
Mm-hmm.
go in bouts of exercises or when you're doing drills. In like for football, for instance, you do a drill and you rest and you have to do the same drill again and you're going around and around depending on your starter, depending on what position you're doing, depending on what drill you're doing. And just to have that good aerobic base that you can get your heart rate to spike up pretty high during the drill and then it comes back down so you can recover, catch your breath faster, and then go and do it again. So that repeatability, that's extremely important for any sport that you do. Maybe not so much baseball. I mean, baseball loves to condition their athletes for the least aerobic demanding sport, I think, besides golf. Even if you got to, the most aerobic part of golf is walking from hole to hole. And even if you have a cart, it's not even aerobically challenged whatsoever. But that is 100% skill. Like that is fully skill, and that's what's going to make or break if you're a good golfer or not. Basketball, yes, skill is probably one of the most important things too. But if you're a string bean, completely weak, and you have no power or strength to back up when you go into the paint, like that's when we talked about with Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant to put on some size so they can take the hits when they get to the paint, just so they can survive and play longer. Like the longevity piece comes into play there too. So that's why I made the post. It was pretty funny. I was basically just like a funny post being like, yeah, we got to get outside the weight room because I know I just responded to a comment and I wanted to make a point here because me and you and a lot of strength coaches are something called the weight room hero. Like we are, if you look in the gym of any sport, and there's always one guy that is the best in the weight room by far. Like they have just crushing weights. All the metrics are great, like we were talking about before, but they sit the bench or they don't, or they're a reserve guy and they don't get starter minutes on the court or on the field or anything. Like even like being a big impactful player for the team. And I always just saw that as the disconnect of because when and I always say it's the pipeline becoming a strength coach because that's usually what happens is you fall in love with the training more than you do the sport. And that's what happened to me, assuming that's what happened to you. And a lot of strength coaches are like that too. It's like they weren't the best Division 1 basketball players ever, or any sport. They weren't Division 1, they weren't pro, whatever. It's usually the strength coaches that fell in love with the process of training. They saw them get a little bit better, but they didn't just have that genetic component to get to that next step, or maybe using the weight room too much to supplement for the skill. And like that's where the delusion comes in with the weight room hero. Is I remember being like, oh, med ball throws, like I'm just gonna do those instead of swinging, and my velo is gonna fly high. It did a little bit, had a little uptick, but then after that, I'm just throwing the med ball as hard as I possibly can, and I was beating professional pitchers, like throwing the shot put with the running gun. Like, I was beating them by a good couple miles per hour, but then I get a ball, I'm throwing 58 miles an hour because my arm hurts.
Yeah.
And these guys are sitting 92, 95. I was like, I have the same sports performance metrics as them, but clear as the skill gap is completely different because they're just so much more biomechanically sound. They're better at throwing a ball than I am.
Yeah. And that's why I think that javelin is a great representation of this issue that we have with the pyramid scheme. Because with that being said, you know, javelin is measured to be a max performance metric, right? It's just who throws the furthest. So in terms of the weight room metrics, the sprinting metrics, the jumping metrics, the med ball throw metrics, it seems like that would translate really, really well because our sport is just the same thing. It's a little bit different of a max effort power output skill, right? So it's instead of testing your power clean max or your med ball throw max or your vert jump max, you're testing your javelin throw max. So our skill is still a maximum power event, right? And that's where, like you touched up upon, you fall in love with the process more than the actual sport. And that's exactly what happened to me because for those of you who don't know my story, I came into college with a partially torn UCL. I competed my first year with it. I came in fourth in the conference through like 55 meters, which was pretty promising for an overweight 19-year-old kid with a partially torn UCL. Then my sophomore year, I missed the season because I had that Tommy John surgery, but I lost 30 pounds. And that's when I started to work my way back up, put on the muscle mass, get really mobile. I started working with a private coach to improve my mobility and my mechanics and start to learn more about nutrition and tracking my calories. And then I did all this work for 2 years basically, because from the end of my freshman year till right before my junior year, that was 2 years of me just grinding and tracking every metric and tracking all the calories and getting better at running and jumping and lifting and doing mobility and checking all the boxes off. And then COVID hit my junior year. So now I'm going on year 3 of just training and no competition. And so that is a really weird place to be in mentally because you don't really know what you're training for anymore. You don't know, even in the spring of 2021, which was going to be my senior year, we weren't sure what that was going to look like. And it ends up turning out that we got cleared to practice in March of that year, but we had a shortened season and we weren't allowed to travel outside the state. So even that being said, like that last year of college was still just training on my own at Powerhouse Gym with Nevin and Jordan at the time. And so my whole college career was it was injury, and then you train for 4 years, and then you're in this place where you're a 20, 21-year-old kid where you don't even know what I was like at that point where I'm like, what's the point of even doing the sport anymore? Like if 2021 gets canned, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to go to grad school and come back for an extra year. I'm like, I don't know if it's meant to be anymore. So that's where for me, like I did practice the sport like twice a week, but I spent 4 hours a day of just training, right? And that's where my base got super wide and people would see me and, I'm 6'3", I'm 220. It's like 10% body fat. I could triple broad jump 10 yards. My vert was probably like mid 30s, like 35. I could back squat 465, could bench over 3 plates, clean over 3 plates, like pretty decent numbers. Like definitely not high D1 pro level, but for a kid that started off being an average high school athlete or like a slightly above average high school athlete, I made a ton of progress. And I also had an insane amount of lack of competing, right? By the time I was a senior, I competed 3 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm like, so that's where for me, that's kind of just the path that I had where it was really hard for me to even know, like, I'm like, I was so removed from the actual coaches and practice of the team because I was always on a customized routine because of Tommy John, or then we had our season canceled because of COVID. So we didn't practice as a team for a year. So out of those 3 years where I was just training around the clock year round, I had 2 years where I was completely on my own basically and not with the team, not competing. And then as a javelin thrower, it's hard enough as it is because you don't compete indoors. So you only compete in the outdoor season, which is April and then half of May. And so you compete for 6 weeks as a javelin thrower. And that's where a lot of kids actually just don't know how to compete well and how to actually get out there and know how to throw in a competition, because it's a different skill than learning how to throw in practice, and then learning how to throw in practice is different than training in the weight room. So that's exactly how I went from being an athlete to just falling in love with the training process. And I am, in terms of periodization, I'm somebody that, when you look at the 4 tiers that we have, the bottom being fitness and conditioning, and then being strength and power and mobility, and then getting up to speed and plyos, I had that 75% like dialed in. Like I'm pretty sure I was very close to my genetic potential in all 3 of those. I did not come close to my genetic potential in terms of the skill of the sport, because by the end of I did end up going back to grad school and doing 1 year of grad school. I ended up throwing 60 meters, which is, it got me like second in the conference, fifth in New England. Decent, not enough to make it to nationals, but for D2, I was like top 30 in the country. So decent, but not the best, right? And you consider like that 65 to 70 meter range is like, that's pretty good, right? Like anything below that is like, that's decent. It's not terrible being 60 meters, but it's, I had such little time in terms of like actual competitions and actual time with the team and with a coach to actually like practice the skill of training, but then also the skill of training for javelin, but also the skill of competing in javelin competitions. So that last season, my senior year was a shortened season. We started training with the team in March, ended up competing for like 6 weeks. I did 5 competitions, and then I was done. On to the next year. Then my grad school year, I started to figure it out. And then after that is when, 23 years old, I start working full time, get engaged, start focusing on my coaching career, and so on and so forth. And so that's where, for me, because I spent those 4 years pretty much only dedicated to strength and conditioning and building that base, and then I spent 1 year basically focusing on the skill, it wasn't enough time to refine the skill to get to my genetic potential for the skill of javelin throwing. And that's where, I think that if I had, I know it's easy to say, but like if I had known what I know now, and then if I had competed consistently from 23 to 25, 23 to 26, like I am now, I believe that I would have reached a lot higher. But it's like, time gets away from you, and life happens, but it's like you have that base, but if you don't actually train for the skill and get out there and compete, then it's not gonna come to fruition.
Yeah, that's what I try to tell athletes all the time. And I think it was really prevalent to see, like, working in a strength and conditioning facility or just working in a baseball facility, seeing the guys come in. And it's hard for me, and I'm sure it's hard for you if you were in my seat, or anyone that takes training extremely serious. And for me, and I know other strength coaches we follow talk about, training is the sport. Like, our sport is to train. Like, we love training, like the squat, the bench, the deadlift. Like, those are all skills that we want to get really good at. We want to jump high, like Olympic lifting, whatever. Like, that's our sport. That's why we care so much about lifting. Like, powerlifters, their sport are 3 exercises, and they have to be the best that they can at those 3 exercises. It's hard for us to have athletes come in and not have that bias already ingrained in us, like when they come in, because those kids do not value the training as much as we do, because it's not their sport. It is a supplement. It is a supplement to what they want to get better at. So for baseball guys, how can they hit harder, throw faster, and run faster? Like, that's pretty much like, how can they rotate better? How can they get their arm to not hurt? And how can they throw more strikes? That's not our job, but how can they just throw more strikes in the zone with more velocity? That's pretty much what it comes down to in terms of just baseball sports performance. So for me, that's where I felt a little bit misaligned, where it being like, I don't want to just train you to have your arm feel less in pain. Like, yeah, if you just do some rows and be able to do chin-ups, like, I'm sure your arm will feel a lot better. Like, you can't do a 1 body weight chin-up. You get that to 10, your arm's a lot stronger and your whole system's stronger as a whole. You'll probably feel better throwing. But for me, seeing them come in and just not give a shit as much as I did, like, that's where I felt like we're missing something. But it's hard for me to take the step back and being like, at the end of the day, still, it's like, what I'm doing here is important, but it's not the most important thing in their whole athletic development.
Yeah, and I think that I know Tim Riley makes the joke a lot that like strength coaches are autistic a little bit.
Oh, I'm 100% autistic.
We've talked about
We've
that a
talked
lot.
about that. We are just full in it. Yeah.
And so And then I'm just gonna be shouting out like everyone right now. But
Hell
then,
yeah,
but
give them
then,
out, baby, give them out.
And then Mike Israetel talks about how like very high level performers sometimes like have a hard time turning it off. But then a lot of times there's the elite level guys that are very go with the flow and they have a lot of that feminine energy to them, not in a bad way, but like in a way that allows them to be very fluid and athletic without really being all that brute force. And so, you have these kind of you have these different like personality traits, and I feel like that might be the reason why we liked the weight room so much, was because we have a lot of that. All right, we are high performers. We might not be the high performers in the sport, but in another area, being the weight room and being our profession and being really that like autistic little bit of like,
It's not a little.
being a little bit of that
Yeah.
autistic in terms of, I think, liking the feedback and almost knowing like, oh, I improved. And then you kind of get that dopamine rush of seeing your numbers go up each week, versus with the sport, you have your season and then you have a 9-month period where you're not in season anymore. You don't get that feedback loop until the next year.
Hmm. Yeah.
Where I think that maybe because strength coaches, if we're so like dopamine wired to the progress, that, when we were athletes, if that's what deep wired in us to be able to be like, this is going to help us improve, because as you see the off season progress, you're getting those feedback loops of your metrics in the weight room or testing the vert and the broad jump and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic point because when you're practicing your sport in baseball, like your miles per hour, if you're a 20 something year old guy, like your pitching miles per hour, if you've been pitching your whole life, isn't going to have a 10-mile-an-hour increase in a season or like a 12-week block. But it's not crazy to see 100-pound difference in your back squat in a 12-week training cycle, like if you're just starting training. So that's 100% where I see it, is the quick hits of the progression, and that keeps you wanting to come back in the training, is because you see like my vert was 24 inches.
Shout out autism.
Autism rocks, baby. No, but like if you start with a vert at 24 inches, you do a full training block, and then you test every 4 weeks, and you go from 24 to 27 in 4 weeks. It's a 3-inch increase. That's pretty big.
Yeah.
That's a big increase.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at, is that I think that the people that are like really, really good at the sport have maybe just inside of them a little bit more of that delayed gratification, where they're just like, they only care about the sport. And so, the whole off season, they're able to stay a little bit more chill. I think a lot of times those are the guys that probably stay healthy a little bit better.
Yeah, 100%. Because they're not crushing themselves in the weight room trying to get a 5-pound increase on their squat.
Yeah, not that they're not trying, but it's, they could walk away from that session and be like, all right, I'm cool, versus someone like you and I, who, if we didn't get that 5-pound PR, like we were going to be genuinely upset for
It would have ruined our whole day.
probably more than a day.
It probably would have been a week. Probably would have been like,
Yeah.
wow, this whole week's terrible now.
Yeah, so that's what I mean, is that, when you start having that emphasis on the weight room, you got to be careful with it, because that's how it does start to take away from the sport. And, not that being a strength coach is bad or anything, but you could just see that, when you're a good athlete and you're obsessed with the numbers and the grind and the work ethic and the, all the data and the science of exercise science and the training, and that slowly starts to become your main focus, because that's what you're doing 9 months out of the year. And then you see like the higher level athletes that seemingly don't care as much. They still do what they got to do, but then they're really good at their sport because their mental clarity is better. They're more confident. They're just focused in the skill proficiency and just, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but you see a lot of high level guys that their body composition's not perfect, or they might not be the biggest, fastest, strongest, but they're just really good at the sport.
Yeah, it's definitely the pipeline if you feel like you're in one of these buckets. Like Dane Miller from Garage Strength has like the 4 types of athletes. I'm not sure where we would fit in, but he pretty much uses it for his assessment type, like seeing what type of athlete they are, like if they need more positive reinforcement, if they just don't really care and they need to be taught like to care. you have the guys that miss the 5 pound PR and they're depressed for a month. Like they all fit into a bucket. And for me, that's where I definitely am. It's just I put so much emphasis in the weight room, and like you were saying, it's because that's what you're doing majority of the year, especially in the Northeast where baseball is 3 months out of the year outside. Like your main season is going to be inside. Fall ball, I've already talked about, where people probably don't even need skill work at that point. They need to get stronger, but that's a different topic. But how much weight training can you do to get better at your sport? And like you figure that out, and then you hit all those metrics and those baseline metrics that we talk about. Like there are certain standards that you should be able to hit in the weight room, but what happens when you hit those? Like,
Yeah, the margin of, not that it's diminishing return, but the amount of effort it's going to take. For example, I'll take Jordan Davis, for example. One of my athletes, for those of you who don't know, one of my athletes who threw came in throwing 63 meters with me, ended up throwing 84, but was one of the best throwers in US history. He's like number 6 all time. So anyway, with him, so I'm just prefacing that because we got the new YouTube channel, so there might be new people that don't know. But
subscribe
go
to
follow the
YouTube.
YouTube. I was about to say that. Go subscribe to the YouTube.
I'm already on it, baby. I'm already on it.
That's so funny.
Shout out YouTube. Shout out YouTube.
Anyway, so the year he threw 84, he hit 385 on the bench, right? That year he went up from 74 meters to 84 meters. But that was also the first year that he didn't play football. So he spent so much more time doing the skill acquisition to actually get better at javelin throwing, but also was, didn't have to worry about deloading during a 4-month football season and then rebuilding his lifting numbers back up over the winter and then peaking again for javelin. So now he had like a whole 9-month off season, focused a lot more on skill acquisition, but his bench also got up to 385 from probably like 350 the year before. Then from there, going from 350 to 385 helped him get 10 more meters, right? Once you get to throwing 277 feet, you going from 385 to 400, it's not going to get you, like that alone is not going to get you another 10 meters. But that will take a ton of time and effort and energy and programming. And that's like, that'll take an hour a day, probably 3 days a week to be able to get to that next level. And it's like, that 3 hours a week, if we have 15 hours a week to train, like that percentage of time is not worth putting towards the bench press anymore. It's better to put it somewhere else and to continue to refine the skill of the sport and the javelin throw and maybe some other areas that he's a little bit weaker in the weight room, because that's just then continuing to like increase the bench press is not going to continue to get him 10 meters a year.
It's the same thing with the squat. Like I was just telling Gannon today, the athlete that I trained, is that he wants a 475 squat for 3. Like, oh man, my camera died. It's all right. Wide view this one. But like there's a study out there. It could be debunked, or people always discredit or credit studies too much, so take this with a grain of salt. But once you get your squat up to about 1.7 times your body weight, there's no real carryover difference in between your jump height or your sprint. So if I'm 200 pounds and I'm squatting 405, like for people that have been in the weight room for a while, a 405 squat is not the craziest thing in the world. Like if you've really been in the weight room, like a 405 squat isn't mind-blowing stuff. A 500-pound squat, that takes a lot longer to get, in my opinion. And it's like the road to 405 was a lot easier than 405 to 500, but my jump didn't increase, or I didn't get any faster or anything, instead of those newbie gains at the start. So that's where like the metrics come in, and you try to see where you're at physically to see if that's a bucket that needs to be filled. Then spend more time in the weight room, worry about building the base, and that could help transfer over to your skill. But if you're already there, like how we were, and being that weight room hero, what's the point of trying to get your squat more than 2 times body weight, like, and only just to say you have a 6 squat, you have a better squat? Like, what's the point? So it's a small population of people that get it, and it's basically all strength coaches. Like I was saying before the podcast, like the people that commented being like, dude, totally understand. Like I look on their page, they're strength coaches or people that love to work out, like they get it. And the people that don't really understand or don't really train as hard as we do or care so much about training, those comments are like, yeah, dude, no shit. It's like you haven't played basketball in 2 years. Like crazy that you lost. But I was always the one being like, if I just do more in the weight room, like I'll be better at the sport. And it's just not true.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just that constant refinement of looking at your training. And once you check those boxes off of the fitness, the strength, the power, mobility, the speed, the plyometrics, you need to spend time getting better at your sport and doing skills that are going to make you more proficient. And, if you're a thrower, you're working on your hip shoulder separation. If you're a basketball player, you're working on your handles or your shot. You're a golfer, you're working on your swing. Baseball player, working on your swing. It's like those are all the things that are going to make you better at the sport. And yeah, just don't get lost in the weeds of chasing metrics all the time.
Yeah, just play your sport. Thanks for tuning in.
And if you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and review and share the show, because the only way that this show grows is if you like it, share it, and tell your friends and family about it.
New episode every Monday.